Hello, my name is John Albanese, and this is my final presentation for my video presentation for Liberal Studies 101. I'd like to begin by explaining why I chose my major and study areas. So, originally at Anderson, I was a theology major. I chose this originally because I already knew I had a great heart for the field. I loved it when I took it at my high school, which was a private Christian school, and also eventually came to peace with the fact that I would want to be a pastor of some kind someday, which was looking to be a Catholic priest at the time because I had converted to Catholicism. So it still will probably be clerical in nature within the Catholic Church, but a priest might not be what I'm cut out for, what I'm called to do. But either way, the diaconate or even just being a theology teacher or anything like that could be something that I use all of my theology training for. But I decided, but I've also been very good at language, and I knew that from back when I was a middle schooler. At that same school, they had a Latin program, and the first time I took Latin, I struggled at first, but I became one of the best Latin students in the school. I was even honored as the Latin student of the year that year before they finished the program for middle school, and just had it go from K to 6. But either way, I noticed then that I had a good mind for learning languages as well. So about a year and a half ago, I sort of just was like, okay, I'm gonna actually take the effort to actually become fluent at a language. And I chose Spanish because I already had some training in it from high school, but also because one of my fellow parishioners suggested a book to me or mentioned an interesting book called The Mystical City of God, by a Spanish visionary nun, Venerable Mary of Agreda, who, supposedly saw visions of the life of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And since I knew it was originally in Spanish, although when I first, or I'll go through it, go through this a little more orderly, I decided, well, since I know some Spanish, I can try to translate it myself. And so I got an abridged copy and began trying to, and it was a very eye-opening process because I realized how little I actually did know about it. I sort of thought, okay, I know how languages work, so I'll just use this to patch up my vocabulary and learn whatever else I need to about grammar, but then I learned there was so many things I didn't know about it. So I followed that path, not just from translating this book, but from learning and taking a lot of efforts to use what's on the internet to learn Spanish, improving my proficiency until I essentially was fluent. But I realized that I really wanted to study it academically as well, and since I was already so far along in my degree program, and I had transferred out about sophomore year to go to a Catholic school, or, yeah, I was a sophomore when that happened. Anyway, it's been a long road, but besides that, when I transferred out, there were some courses that when I decided to come back to Anderson that weren't able to be used as the core curriculum, so they just graciously accepted them as electives. So, considering that also, and the fact that I was so far along in my theology program, I noticed that there was really no way I could take Spanish courses, because I wasn't going to add a minor. But we decided to research into maybe a general studies program, and there was one, and found out that I could finish up some of my 12 credit hours with Spanish. And so I was very excited to do that, and that's the main reason why I have theology and Spanish as my study areas, and I'm planning to use them to once again advance my possibilities to any clerical career, but also to be able to use my Spanish in a career environment as well, whether it's interpreting or tutoring or being a professor in Spanish or anything. I just love the language that much, so I'm very thankful for the opportunity. The topic I chose for my paper was the Counter-Reformation in Spain, and the particular thing I wanted to look at was why Spain has been so strong against Protestantism throughout its history. The Counter-Reformation is a time, or is the name of a movement which happened after the Protestant Reformation broke in the early 16th century. And Protestantism overtook several countries, including most of Germany, and, all the other, a lot of Scandinavian countries, and England fell to it as well, and just, it was a new thing, but Spain in particular, and Spain and France as well, but Spain being the topic of my paper, has remained very faithful to the Catholic faith throughout its history, and there's been almost no Protestantism at all. I remember as I researched a little bit about how Catholic it still is today, despite the fact that a lot of people don't practice the faith. How many people still identify as Catholic is over 60%, which is a sad number, but if you look at how many people identify as Protestant, it's like 0.02%. So why did Protestantism fail so badly in Spain, and not in other countries where it at least developed a sizable minority? That was what I was interested in looking into, and so that's why I chose the topic, in addition to the fact that it is important to both of my study areas, being the theological aspect, the Reformation, and whatever ecclesiastical and theological efforts had to be put forth by the Spanish people to prevent them from being overtaken or even sizably affected by Protestantism as a phenomenon. So the research process involved a lot of reading. I had to find a lot of different sources on the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Reading a lot of primary sources too. Particularly, I have these two pictures of these two saints here, Ignatius of Loyola and Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, and Teresa of Avila, the reformer of the Carmelite order and founder of the Barefoot Carmelites. They were both very instrumental in the Counter-Reformation in Spain, and also in fighting Protestantism, because in particular, the order of the Jesuits was actually founded basically to do whatever the Pope wanted, but since at the time Protestantism was like a huge issue in Europe for the Catholic Church to deal with, they basically were put to work to basically stamp out the Protestant heresy wherever they could find it. And so, for example, one of their faithful sons, the St. Peter Cancisius, I believe, he actually reclaimed the southern part of Germany for the Catholic faith for the most part, just by through education and doing the work of his religious order. So it required some, like I said, some primary source reading, which involved the poetry or not the poetry, but the biography of St. Teresa of Avila, where she talks about her own efforts at fighting Protestantism, though hers were more prayerful. Though she also she was a mystic herself, and wrote a lot of works on prayer and things like that, which were her own way of kind of fomenting the Catholic faith in the hearts of the people. And of course, like I said, she also reformed her own order, which was necessary. The whole point of the Counter-Reformation is not just to counter the Protestant Reformation, but it was also to reform the Church herself, because the Church had to recognize, especially in the face of the Protestant Reformation, that she actually was in desperate need of reform, which is why the whole thing happened in the first place. Ultimate findings were that eventually I found that the monarchy was very firm against Protestantism in the country. They wanted to maintain religious unity, especially as a country that had been occupied by the Muslims at one point and almost completely conquered. They were not one to think that dividing Christianity into two or more camps possibly would be a very good way at maintaining themselves protected from foreign threats, which they're very close to Africa and Muslim countries, and also they still weren't completely free from the Muslim yoke at the time of the Counter-Reformation. So it definitely did not look good to the government of Spain or to very many of its inhabitants that anything besides the Catholic faith would be heralded within its territories. So that was one main reason, which is why they took full advantage of the machinery of the church. Its index of prohibited books, which put obviously all the major works by the Protestant authors on that list, which was basically a censorship list of books, and also the Inquisition, which was meant to try and convict heretics, and which of course involved their execution sometimes at the hands of the secular authorities. So this was something that I knew before, but also was confirmed by my research, is that that even though the Inquisition was tasked with finding heretics and convicting them, the punishment was carried out by the secular government. So a lot of the big reason for why Protestantism didn't make big inroads is because it faced a lot of opposition from the government and the church in Spain. And also it was discovered that there really was a strong resistance to it from the peoples, from the ordinary man. Whenever things like this, whenever it was heard that, someone was convicted of a heresy or whatever, they would often come in great droves to watch this execution take place, and give their assent to it because they were that devoted to the faith. So, not to say, of course, that the execution was right, but that's the time that they lived in. So, besides that, let's see, what do we have to do now? So my future considerations for research, especially, and this is highly relevant to me because I'm a senior and I only have about 8 more credit hours or so to go. Wait, no, that's not true. Let's see, how many courses is it? I'm basically taking 4 courses over the next 2 semesters to graduate, and that involves my senior seminar, which I should be taking next semester. And so I have to come up with a lot of ideas for that thesis that you have to do. And of course, also continuing on to get a master's or anything like that, you have to have another thesis, which will be important if I do go to seminary. That's basically a master's of divinity. So what will I do for my undergrad thesis is something that I have in my mind. But I'm really interested, I think, in more topics that have to do with Spain and Christianity, and the Spanish language in particular, if I can think of any good research topics with that. But one thing I do like about a certain topic, like, for example, the history of the church in Spain and various struggles that she may have gone through, is because often when you study church history, you study it more in a universal way. And whenever something happens in a particular place that has great import for the church as a whole, that's usually what you study. But you don't usually study the history of, let's say, the church in a particular place. Because that usually, if you're studying it as a more broad focus, that usually falls by the wayside. So what was it like for the Catholic Church in Spain, or let's say even in modern Spanish-speaking countries? How did it get there? How did evangelization take place, and how did it get where it is today? Anything that goes into that is something I'm very interested in. I have a picture of Dante's Purgatory in the middle. Well, this picture here is the cathedral in Toledo, but besides that, I have here also Dante's Purgatory, because one topic that I actually sort of thought about, even before I decided to become a liberal studies major, was purgatory in Scripture, particularly in the writings of St. Paul, because when I was reading some of the writings that we had to do for the course, I noticed that there were a lot more images that may be suggestive of purgatory in his writings. So that's something that really interests me, and I may even do that for my senior thesis. And I have the picture of the Latin Vulgate here because I really just am more interested in studying Catholic doctrine and scripture, doing really doing very detailed study of that. Because, like I said, purgatory is something that I do think is supported by scripture, but sometimes all you really know if you're a convert or even a practitioner of the Catholic faith that just wants to know a little more about how to defend the faith, usually you only look at things from like a very surface level. So the basic proof texts. And I know that there's much more evidence for several doctrines because I've already had a pretty good education in that. So why not investigate it more for Catholic distinctive doctrines and see what the scriptural basis actually is. So thanks for watching, and thank you for the course, and I hope you have a good summer.